Well, to talk more about Kenya, our Chief Foreign Affairs Editor Rob Parsons joins me in the studio. Good to have you, Rob. We saw on Wednesday that Kenya's Supreme Court was unable to make a decision about whether today's presidential rerun should go ahead. How does this bode well? I mean, something's surely amiss here.
Yeah, I mean, it points to the chaos surrounding this election. In August, when the Supreme Court took its decision to annul the August 8th election, everybody was saying then, this is fantastic for Kenya, it's fantastic for Africa as a whole. It demonstrates that the separation of powers works in Kenya, that the judiciary is independent. And yet here we are, just the day before the election, the Supreme Court is meant to rule on the question of whether to postpone the elections, to hold a hearing on that, and can't do so because it can't get a quorum. 5 of 7 judges don't turn up. It's extraordinary. 2 of them sort of had an excuse. One was abroad for medical treatment, and another one was in shock because she had witnessed her bodyguard being shot the previous day. The others had no excuse at all. It creates the impression that the Supreme Court is coming under political pressure. Whether it's true or not, it creates the impression that the Supreme Court is under pressure. And it's not just the Supreme Court. We're talking more broadly as well about other major institutions that have a big effect on the election, including the Electoral Commission.
Now, we saw, speaking of the Electoral Commission, last week one of the members actually stepped down, saying it would be impossible to have to guarantee free and fair elections. Can Kenya deliver those type of elections in this political climate?
Well, it's really difficult to see how it's possible. We're seeing today, in parts of the country, the elections hardly seems to be going ahead at all. In the town of Kisumu, for instance, only 3 of 400 electoral officials have turned up. Polling stations are shut. There's nobody turning up to vote. In other parts of the country, it's a more mixed picture. But the general impression that you have, we just do not have the conditions for a free and fair election in Kenya at the moment. Even the head of the Electoral Commission said it would be impossible to guarantee free and fair elections. And you point out one of the members of the Electoral Commission stepped down and has since fled to the United States because she's been getting threats to her life. It's not the environment you want to hold an election, which could have an important bearing on the future of your country.
Now, we touched on it there, Rob. On one hand, in August, Kenya was being saluted and praised by many other African countries and indeed worldwide. Yeah. Well done for annulling the elections, etc. Now the outlook doesn't appear so rosy.
It doesn't. It really does not appear rosy at all. There's a lot of disappointment, I would suspect, amongst reformists continent-wide. People have been looking to these elections in Kenya as a moment where Africa could take a step forward, where the democracies in Africa could take a step forward. Instead, we're seeing a step backwards. And we don't know how badly things can go wrong. We saw back in 2007, after the election, then there was massive violence. Over 1,000 people got killed. Hundreds of thousands of people were displaced from their homes. The big fear will be that the same thing will happen here. And the whole process of democratization in Africa could be set back who knows how far.
Now, we know also that, today so far, Raila Odinga, the opposition leader, hasn't shown up, as it were. No news from him yet, but he was clearly urging supporters yesterday to boycott this election, saying it's not free and fair.
Yeah.
Don't go ahead and cast your ballot.
Absolutely. At one stage, he seemed to be calling for his supporters to take to the streets, and there was a fear that there would be serious clashes today throughout Kenya. There have been clashes already, but since then, he's called on his supporters not to do that, and preferably to stay at home, but certainly to boycott the election. So hopefully the clashes that people were fearing might have happened as a consequence of that reassessment by Odinga will not happen now. But the problem here is, I think, the context. Kenya is a society which is still pretty much split along tribal lines. People vote according to their tribal affiliation, by and large. Of course, it's not an absolute, not absolutely the case. The Kikuyu tribe have dominated Kenyan politics. Another large tribe to which Raila Odinga himself belongs, the Luo, have been on the peripheries of power because they haven't been able to get themselves elected into office. While that division along tribal lines remains, it's always going to be difficult to get reform through in Kenya. Over the last 10 years, big efforts have been made, and progress has certainly been made. But the problem now, the fear must be now that as a consequence of this election, all those reforms that have been made, all those efforts that have been made over the last 10 years could be set back.
Well, Rob, as we've been saying, voting clearly underway in Kenya today, despite what's gone on the day before and indeed months ahead of this. We'll be following the story closely. For now, though, thank you.